When a billionaire dad noticed the way a waitress lovingly fed his disabled son, he never imagined that simple act of kindness would change both their lives forever. T. Clara Malik was a quiet woman. She lived in a small, peaceful town where everyone knew everyone else. She was 42 years old, a simple wife who never tried to be famous or special. Her world was small: her husband Daniel, her 2 children, her garden, and her weekly church visits. People in the town loved her for her kindness. If someone was sick, she would bring them soup. If a child was crying, she would give them candy or tell them a story. But there was one thing nobody really knew about Clara, something hidden deep inside her. Something even she had almost forgotten. Clara once loved music. Long ago, she played the piano like magic. But that part of her life had been buried for many years. Now her days were filled with washing clothes, cooking meals, helping her children with homework, and talking to Daniel about bills and groceries. Her piano stood in the corner of the living room, covered with a lace cloth, silent and dusty. It hadn't made a sound in years. Daniel, her husband, had always felt that Clara was special in ways even she didn't see. He saw it in her eyes. Whenever piano music played on the radio, he saw how her fingers tapped on the table unconsciously when a melody ran through her head, but she never played, not once in over 20 years. One day, near her birthday, Daniel decided to do something unexpected. He bought her a place in a summer music appreciation course at the Royal Conservatory in London. It wasn't meant to be a pressure. It was just a short course for people who loved music, whether they were experts or not. He gave her the envelope with the registration inside, along with a small note that said, "For the music still inside. You." Clara was shocked. At first, she laughed, thinking it was a mistake. Me? In a conservatory? Daniel, those people are real musicians. But Daniel just smiled. You are too. You just forgot. It took days for Clara to decide. She didn't feel ready, didn't feel good enough, didn't feel young enough. But deep down, something whispered to her the sound of old piano notes and childhood dreams. So finally she agreed. She packed her things nervously. It would be her first time staying away from home alone in years. The conservatory was a big, historic building in London. It had huge halls, grand staircases, and students walking around with violins, flutes, or sheet music in their hands. Clara felt completely out of place the moment she walked in. Her classmates were young, some barely 20. They spoke in musical terms she didn't understand. They dressed stylishly, walked with confidence, and talked about composers like old friends. Clara wore her usual soft sweaters and carried a simple notebook. She sat quietly at the back of the classroom, listening carefully and trying not to draw attention. The teachers were mostly experienced musicians, many of them famous in the classical music world. They were proud of their careers, and some of them didn't hide their belief that music belonged to those who lived and breathed it. Clara just listened, took notes, and kept her head down. She didn't want to compete. She only wanted to learn. Days passed like that, quiet and uncomfortable. She didn't speak unless someone spoke to her first. She stayed behind after classes, looking at the grand pianos in the practice rooms, but never touching them. She was a ghost among stars, invisible and forgotten. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was during a lecture about expression. In music, the professor, Mr. Camden, was known for his strictness and sharp tongue. He was explaining how emotion should come through the fingers, not just the notes. Then he suddenly turned toward Clara. "You've been very quiet, Mrs. Malik," he said, "in front of everyone. Have you ever played before?" The entire room turned to look at her. Clara froze. "A little long ago," she said softly. Mr. Camden raised an eyebrow. "Would you like to demonstrate tomorrow? Let's see how much long ago really means." There were smirks around the room. One student whispered, "She probably thinks Chopin is a kind of chocolate." Clara forced a small smile. "I'll try," she said, even though her heart was racing. When class ended, she left quickly, her face hot with shame and fear. Why did she agree? What was she thinking? Back at her dorm room, she couldn't sleep. Her mind was spinning. She looked up famous piano pieces on her laptop, searching for something that spoke to her soul. Then she saw it Chopin's Ballade No. 1. Her fingers tingled, just looking at the sheet music. It was a beautiful, complicated, and emotional piece. One she had tried to play as a teenager, a piece that had once brought her to tears. She found a small practice room late at night. The building was quiet. Only a janitor passed by, giving her a strange look. She sat at the piano, touching the keys gently at first. Her fingers were stiff, her timing was off, but slowly, like a river breaking through a dry valley, the music returned. She played through the night, stopping only to cry once in a while. Memories flooded her grandfather who taught her, of the competitions she once entered, of the stage where she collapsed and never returned. She remembered the music she buried for decades under the weight of marriage, motherhood, and self-doubt. By morning, her fingers were sore, and her heart was full. She knew what she would do. The next day in class, everyone looked curious. Clara walked in, calm but quiet. Mr. Camden pointed to the piano. "Your moment, Mrs. Malik." "I hope you don't mind," she said softly, "but I chose my own piece." Camden raised his eyebrows. "As you wish." She sat down. The room was half interested, some students already expecting a mess. Someone even pulled out their phone to secretly record what they assumed would be a disaster. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, but sure. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then faster, more confidently. The room fell silent. There was no talking, no movement. Just music. No one expected what they heard. The young students stared in disbelief. The teachers exchanged looks. The emotion in her playing, the rise and fall of each phrase, the control and chaos, it wasn't perfect in technique, but it was beautiful in soul. Clara played like she had nothing to prove. She played like she had carried this music in her heart for decades, locked away in silence. And finally, she let it out. When the last note faded, there was a pause. A long, stunned pause, then applause, and then more. Loud, shocked, and amazed. Applause. Clara stood up, her hands shaking. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just whispered, "Thank you," and walked back to her seat. Mr. Camden stood silently. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then he simply said, "Class dismissed." Everyone left the room talking. Phones buzzed. Whispers followed Clara down the hallway. But she didn't listen. She walked quietly, tears in her eyes, back to the little practice room where she had found herself again. She sat at the piano and gently touched the keys. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a simple wife. She felt like Claroth, the girl who loved music, who felt every note, and who finally, after all these years, had let the world hear her heart. And she wasn't done yet. It's not by a long shot. Clara didn't sleep much that night. Even after the applause and the surprised faces, her heart still beat fast, as if she had done something dangerous. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, her fingers dancing over the keys, the silence in the room, and then the applause that followed. She hadn't expected it. She hadn't played for praise. But something inside her had changed. A door that had been shut for years had opened, and now it refused to close again. The next morning, she sat quietly in the dining hall of the conservatory, drinking her tea, pretending not to notice the stares. Several students passed her table, their eyes curious. Some looked surprised, others impressed. One girl with short black hair stopped and said, "That was really something yesterday." Clara thanked her with a small smile. In her class, things felt different now. The same students who once ignored her now seemed interested. But the biggest surprise came when Mr. Camden walked in with a thin smile, looked at Clara, and said, "Mrs. Malik will continue with live demonstrations today. Would you be kind enough to play something else tomorrow?" It didn't sound like a request. It sounded like a test. Clara nodded. "Of course," she said calmly, but inside her nerves came rushing back. After class, she stayed behind. Was gathering his notes when she stepped closer. "Can I choose my own piece again?" she asked. Camden didn't look up. "If you feel confident." His voice was neutral, but Clara could sense something under it. He didn't think she could. Do it twice. Maybe he thought her performance was a lucky moment. A one-time emotional wave. Clara wasn't sure herself. She walked down to the practice rooms again. This time she noticed students looking through the glass windows as she passed. It made her uncomfortable. Like a spotlight was suddenly shining on her when she had always lived in the shadows. She opened the door to the same old piano room and sat down. She ran her fingers gently over the keys. They were cold but familiar. She took out her phone and began searching for a piece. At first, she thought of choosing something simple that would be safer. Something soft, maybe a romantic waltz or a lullaby. But her eyes stopped at Ballade No. 1 again. She had played it yesterday, yes, but she had only scratched the surface. This time she wanted to dig deeper. She wanted to play it in a way that showed who she truly was without fear. Without hiding, she printed the sheet music from the library, borrowed a music stand, and returned to the room. For hours, she played and practiced, correcting her timing, fixing her fingering, remembering old lessons from her childhood. Her muscles were sore, her back ached, but her heart felt alive. As she practiced, she remembered her grandfather again, his wrinkled hands over hers, guiding her gently. "Don't just play the notes, Clara," he used to say. "Tell a story with them. You make people feel something." She wanted to do exactly that. By nightfall, she was exhausted. She walked to her small dorm room, her fingers trembling from fatigue. Daniel called her that night. His voice brought comfort. "How was your day?" He asked. Clara smiled, lying back on the bed. "Strange. People are actually talking to me now. You deserve it," he said gently. "You always have." There was silence on the line for a moment before he added, "Are you scared about tomorrow?" Clara didn't answer right away. "Yes," she whispered. "But this time, I'm not running from it." The next morning, the class gathered again. This time, more students were present than usual. Word had spread. Some weren't even enrolled in the class. They just wanted to see the mysterious older woman who had played like a ghost from the past. Mr. Camden looked around, surprised at the full room, then turned to Clara. "The floor is yours." Clara stood slowly. She wore the same soft blue sweater she had worn yesterday. No makeup, no jewelry, just calm eyes and steady breath. She sat at the piano. This time, her hands didn't shake. She placed the sheet music in front of her, but didn't really need it. The notes were already inside her. Then she began. At first, the piece moved slowly. The quiet introduction danced softly through the room. Like smoke, Clara's fingers moved with patience, with emotion. Her eyes were closed. Wasn't playing for them. She was playing for herself, for her younger self, for the girl who once collapsed on a stage from fear, for the woman who had forgotten how to breathe through music. As the piece grew louder, more dramatic, Clara poured every part of herself into the notes. She remembered the years she had been silent, the pain of giving up music, the joy of returning to it now. It all came out through the music: anger, love, loss, and peace. By the time she reached the final section, she was no longer aware of the room around her. Her soul was completely inside the music. Then the last note rang out. Silence. Followed, no one moved. Then applause. Not just polite clapping, but real, loud, honest applause. Some students stood up. Even Camden gave a small nod of approval. Clara stood, looked at the room full of surprised and amazed faces, and smiled. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Later, as students left the room, one of them approached her. He was tall, with messy hair and nervous eyes. That was unbelievable, he said. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Clara thought for a moment. "In a small house with a creaky old piano and a man who believed I could." The boy grinned. "You should be on stage." Clara laughed softly. "I was, once, a long time ago." After that day, things changed even more. Students invited her to join them for coffee. Teachers asked her opinions on interpretation. Someone even posted a video clip of her performance online, and it started getting thousands of views. Comments poured in. Who is this woman? She plays like the piano is part of her. Why isn't she famous? Clara didn't care about fame. She didn't even check the video. All she cared about was the feeling, the joy of playing. Again, of being heard. That night, the conservatory director, a serious man named Dr. Henderson, asked to meet her. She went to his office nervously, wondering if she had broken some rule, but he greeted her kindly. "Mrs. Malik," he said, "your performance today reached more people than you know." He pulled out a tablet and showed her a clip of her playing, already shared by a famous classical music page. "I also did a little research," he added, looking at her with curiosity. "You were once in the International Young Pianists competition in Vienna, weren't you?" Clara froze. "I was," she said quietly, "but I never finished." "I saw the footage," he said gently.
"How you collapsed on stage during your performance.
That must have been ... traumatic." She nodded, remembering the moment. The lights, the pressure, the sound of her heart pounding louder than the piano, the way everything went dark. "I never played in public again," she said, "until now." Dr. Henderson studied her. "That's a long time to stay silent." "I didn't think anyone would want to hear me," Clara said softly. "Well," he said, smiling. "It seems the world was ready." He leaned forward. "I'm organizing our year-end gala. The whole faculty attends. I don't do many music directors, critics, and journalists. I'd like you to perform." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "I can't." "Why not? I'm not one of your students. I'm not ... anyone." "But you are," he said seriously. "You're someone who made us all feel something we haven't felt in years." Clara looked down. Her fingers were trembling again. "Think about it," he said. "No pressure. But if you say yes, I'll give you any piece you want, any pianist. To accompany you if needed, and all the time you need." She nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That night, Clara sat alone in the practice room again. She didn't play. She just sat, her hands in her lap, staring at the keys. She was afraid. Afraid of failing again. Afraid of the stage. Afraid of the lights, the pressure, the audience. But deeper than the fear was a voice. The same voice that once whispered to her as a child, "You were born to do this." Clara closed her eyes and let the silence surround her. "I didn't..." the answer yet. But she knew one thing. Music had come back into her life, and it wasn't leaving this time. The day of the performance came faster than Clara expected. The gala was just a few days away now, and the entire conservatory buzzed with excitement. Posters had been put up all over the campus. Students were practicing harder than ever. Music filled the hallways, violins warming up, opera singers rehearsing, pianists running scales over and over again. Clara watched it all from a quiet bench outside the main hall. She still hadn't said yes to Dr. Henderson's invitation. Every time she thought about performing at the gala, her stomach tightened. It was too big, too public. She had only just started playing again. And the last time she'd stood on a stage that large, she'd fainted in front of hundreds of people. Still, there was something pulling her toward it, a small but growing voice inside her whispering, "This is your chance." She had spent the last few days thinking, remembering. She visited the conservatory library and found old newspapers. There in one of the music archives was a short article from many years ago. "Teen piano prodigy faints mid-performance in Vienna, pulled from finals." The girl in the photo looked like a different person. She had the same eyes, the same smile, but there was something lost in her expressions, something that hadn't come back for a very long time. That night, Clara found herself back in her favorite practice room. She brought no sheet music this time, just her memory and a dream. She began to play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece her grandfather had loved. It was bold, dramatic, stormy, but it also had beauty, hope, and power. Every time she played it, she felt him sitting beside her again, whispering soft encouragement, tapping her fingers to fix her rhythm, reminding her that music came from the heart. She practiced late into the night. The next morning, she walked into Dr. Henderson's office and said, "I'll do it." He smiled. "Wonderful. What will you play?" "Rachmaninoff," she said, "the Prelude in G minor." He nodded. "It's not easy." I know, Clara said, but it's the only piece that feels like home. Word spread fast. Clara. Malik, the mysterious housewife who stunned the class with Chopin, would perform at the conservatory gala. Some people were thrilled. Others were confused. Few were even doubtful. Why is she performing at the biggest event of the year? One student asked. She's not even a real student here, another muttered. But others defended her. Have you heard her play? Someone said. She's got more soul than half of us combined. The night before the gala, Clara called Daniel. His voice was full of pride. You're going to be amazing, he told her. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of playing, but of being seen. You've already been seen, he said softly. What people saw, they loved. She didn't sleep that night. Her fingers ran over the keys in her dreams. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her ears. The lights, the audience, the stage, they all mixed together in her mind. Finally, the day arrived. Clara dressed simply. No shiny gown, no fancy shoes, just a soft black dress, comfortable flats, and a silver chain around her neck that once belonged to her grandfather. Backstage, chaos swirled around her. Musicians rushed past. Dancers warmed up. Stage managers whispered orders. But Clara stood still, eyes closed, breathing deeply. Are you ready? Someone asked. She turned. It was Mr. Camden, the professor who once mocked her. I think so, said quietly. He looked at her for a moment, then gave a short nod. I was wrong about you, he said. You don't just play music, you speak through it. Clara smiled softly. Thank you. The lights dimmed. The audience settled. The announcer stepped on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, he said into the microphone, please welcome Mrs. Clara Malik with Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. Applause followed, polite but curious. Clara walked out onto the stage. The concert hall was huge. Hundreds of people, bright stage lights, a grand Steinway piano in the center. But she didn't look at the crowd. She looked only at the piano, the one thing that had never lied to her, never judged her, never turned away. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and waited. Silence filled the room. Then she began to play. The first notes came like thunder, powerful, sharp, almost angry. The audience leaned in. Clara's fingers moved like they had a life of their own. Her back was straight, her eyes steady, her face calm. As the piece went on, her playing became a storm. The lower keys pounded like footsteps of giants, while the right hand danced like lightning over the top. Her emotion poured through every movement, fear, joy, sorrow, Paul, wrapped in music that grew louder and louder. People in the audience began to sit up straighter. They weren't just listening, they were feeling. The music wrapped around them, pulling them into Clara's story, into her pain and her healing. As the final part of the piece arrived, Clara's whole body leaned into the keys. Her hands moved faster, stronger. And then, as suddenly as it began, the music slowed, softened, and ended with one haunting note that rang across the room like a final breath. And then, the room didn't move for a full 5 seconds. No one even clapped. They just stared. Then it happened. The entire audience rose to their feet. Applause exploded like fireworks. People clapped, shouted, cheered. Some students had tears in their eyes. Teachers were whispering too, each other in disbelief. A few people had even started recording, unable to help themselves. Clara sat still, stunned. The sound was too loud, too big. But slowly she stood, turned to the audience, and gave a small, humble bow. She walked off the stage quietly, heart still racing. Backstage, several students ran to her. That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that? You gave me chills. She thanked them, hugged a few, then walked toward the dressing area. Dr. Henderson met her halfway. You did more than perform, he said. You reminded everyone what music is meant to be. Clara smiled. Thank you for letting me play. Would you consider teaching here? He asked. We need someone like you. Someone who understands the heart behind the notes. She paused, thinking. Maybe someday, she said. But right now, I just want to play. Later that night, back in her dorm room, she sat at the small practice piano once more. The room was quiet now, no audience, no lights, just her and the keys, she began to play a soft melody, something simple, sweet, almost like a lullaby. It wasn't written down anywhere. It came from inside her, like water finally flowing after years of drought. When she finished, she smiled to herself. Clara Malik, the quiet housewife from a small town, had faced the lights again, but this time she didn't fall. She rose, and now there was no going back. The night after Clara's performance at the gala was quiet. Back in her dorm room, she sat on her small bed, her hands still slightly sore from the performance. Her fingers had danced across the piano like they hadn't in years, and her body felt every second of it. The applause still echoed in her ears, but now that the noise was gone, she was alone with her thoughts. She should have felt proud. She should have been celebrating. But instead, she felt something else, something she hadn't faced in a long time, memories after years of silence. After locking away that part of her life, something had broken open. When she had played Rachmaninoff on stage, something deep inside her had come to life again. But it didn't just bring music, it brought the past with it. She closed her eyes and saw the lights from long ago, not from the conservatory, but from Vienna, the concert stage where she had once tried to prove herself. She was 14, small, nervous, and holding on to a dream that didn't quite fit in her hands. That night had changed everything. She remembered standing backstage in Vienna, the grand hall packed with people from all over the world. The International Young Pianists Competition. She had come with her grandfather as her teacher, her biggest fan and her only support. He had trained her from the time she was 5. He saw talent in her no one else had noticed. On the night of her performance, her hands had been shaking. Her dress was too tight. The lights were too bright. When she sat down to play, something inside her cracked. The first few notes were fine, but then came the dizziness, the pressure. It's the feeling of 1,000 eyes watching every mistake. Her hands froze. Her chest tightened. The keys blurred in front of her, and then blackness. She had fainted. They carried her off the stage. And when she woke up in the hospital, her grandfather was sitting beside her, holding her hand. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," he had whispered, but the damage had already been done. She felt like a failure. She didn't return to the competition. She didn't play again in public. A few weeks later, her grandfather passed away from a stroke. Clara believed deep in her heart that she had let him down. After that, music became painful. Every time she touched a piano, it reminded her of that moment, so she stopped playing. She finished school, married Daniel, became a mother, and quietly buried the part of her that once loved music, until now, standing on stage again, playing for a crowd, hearing the applause, it brought all of that pain back. But also something new, healing. The next day, Clara received a letter. In her dorm room, it was hand-delivered. The envelope was thick and had the Royal Conservatory seal on it. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a formal letter from the board of directors. They praised her performance, her courage, and her musical depth. And at the bottom, it offered her something completely unexpected: a position as a part-time performance mentor for advanced students struggling with stage anxiety. She read it twice to be sure. Then a third time, she sat down slowly, holding the letter to her chest. She couldn't believe it. They weren't just impressed, they wanted her to teach. A few hours later, Dr. Henderson called her into his office. She sat down across from him, still a little stunned. "We meant every word," he said kindly. "But you brought something into that room that technique alone can't teach. Your music came from somewhere deeper." "But I'm not a professional," Clara replied. "I haven't studied for years. I've never taught anyone before." He nodded. "You've lived something most of our students haven't. You've walked through fear, silence, and lost them. You still found your way back. That's powerful. And it's exactly what some of them need." She didn't answer right away. She thought of the students who had watched her, the girl who had whispered, "You gave me chills," the boy who asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Maybe she could help someone else find their way like she had. "I'll try," she said softly. The next week, Clara began sitting in on a few of the advanced piano classes. First, students were shy around her, unsure whether she was one of them or something else. But slowly, things began to change. One by one, students came to her during breaks, asking for advice. How do you calm down before going on stage? What do you do when you forget a part of the piece while playing? How do you stop your hands from shaking? Clara didn't give textbook answers. She told them the truth. I take deep breaths, she said. I remember why I play. I don't try to be perfect. I just try to feel the music. Some students asked her to listen to their practice. She sat with them quietly, offering gentle tips, not just on finger placement or timing, but on emotion. Confidence and connection. 1. Girl named Lily, just 16, had incredible skill but froze every time she had to perform in front of others. Clara sat with her before her recital, held her hand, and said, "You don't have to impress anyone. Just tell them a story through the piano. Pretend the audience isn't even there." Lily smiled nervously, and Clara added, "And if you make a mistake, just keep going. The heart of the music is more important than any one note." Lily went on stage and played beautifully. Afterwards, she ran back and hugged Clara tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. That moment made everything worth it. As weeks passed, Clara started feeling more at home in the conservatory. Students waved at her in the hallways. Teachers nodded respectfully. Even Mr. Camden, the once cold professor, invited her to co-lead a class on emotional performance techniques. One afternoon, she found herself walking through the main lobby, where a grand piano sat in the center. A group of students stood nearby, talking. One of them noticed her and said, "Mrs. Malik, will you play something?" She hesitated, then smiled and sat down. This time, there was no fear. She played something soft, an old lullaby her grandfather used to hum while they cooked dinner together. The students gathered around, quiet and still. Some closed their eyes. Others leaned forward to hear better. When she finished, they clapped softly, not loudly, but with deep appreciation. "Can you teach us that?" Someone asked. Clara nodded. Of course. Later that night, she called Daniel again. "How are things back home?" She asked the kids. "Miss you," he said. "And so do I." "I miss you too." There was a short silence before Daniel said, "Clara, you sound different. Lighter." She smiled. "I think I am." He chuckled. "What didn't I tell you? The music was always inside you." She laughed gently. "I think I just needed someone to believe it again." That night, Clara wrote in her journal, something she hadn't done in years. "Music didn't just return to MIT, brought me back to myself. I thought I was too old, too quiet, too ordinary. But I was wrong. There's no time limit on rediscovery. And no shame in coming back home to what you love." She closed the book, placed it beside her pillow, and turned off the light. Her journey wasn't finished. But for the first time in a long time, Clara felt not lost, not broken, but whole. And the music would play on. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Clara's dorm room as the final day at the conservatory began. Birds were singing outside. Students were rushing down the hallways with coffee cups and sheet music in their hands, and everything around her buzzed with life. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting on her lap, eyes quietly watching the sky. Her time at the conservatory was coming to an end, but something inside her had begun. Something that didn't feel like it was ending. Her fingers still tingled with the memory of the Rachmaninoff piece she had played at the gala. She could still hear the applause, still see the people rising to their feet. But even more than that, she remembered how she had felt on that stage. Not unsure, but free. Her suitcase lay open on the floor. She had packed most of her things, a few clothes. Notebooks filled with musical notes and advice from teachers, and a folder with her mentor invitation. But she kept one thing aside, the silver chain her grandfather had given her. It now held more than memories, it held a promise. She picked it up, kissed it gently, and placed it around her neck. Clara walked down the hallway. And the moment she stepped into the main lounge, students greeted her warmly. Some smiled, some waved. Some thanked her again for helping them or inspiring them. and all she could do was smile back, a little surprised every time. She had arrived at the conservatory a stranger, a quiet, unsure woman who wore soft sweaters and kept to herself. She was known, respected, not for fame, not for being perfect, but for being real. Mr. Camden saw her passing and stopped to speak with her, heading back home. He asked. "Yes," Clara replied. "You've changed a lot of minds," he said, looking thoughtful, including mine. Clara smiled. "You for challenging me, even when it didn't feel very kind at the time." He laughed. "Sometimes the best sparks come from a little friction." They shook hands. As she walked through the conservatory one last time, she took a slow, deep breath. Every corner held memories now. The small classroom where she was first, asked to play. The practice room where she stayed up all night learning Chopin. The hallway where students had first stared at her with confusion. And the stage where she had found herself again. Before leaving, Clara decided to visit the concert hall one last time. The grand piano was there, its lid open, keys glowing under the soft light from above. The room was empty, no audience. Numbered cameras, just silence. She walked up slowly and sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She didn't plan to play. But the piano called her, so she played. This time, it wasn't Rachmaninoff or Chopin. It wasn't a famous piece at all. It was something new, something she hadn't written on paper, something that came from inside her, flowing through her fingertips. Quiet melody, gentle, emotional, full of warmth. As she played, she closed her eyes and imagined her younger self. The girl who had fainted on the Vienna stage sitting next to her. She reached out to that frightened girl through music and told her, "It's okay. You didn't fail. You were just beginning." Then she saw her grandfather in her mind, smiling from the first row, his hands clapping slowly in that quiet, proud way he always had. When the last note faded, Clara sat still for a moment. Then softly, small applause came from the doorway. She turned to see Dr. Henderson standing there. "I wasn't going to interrupt," he said gently. "But that was beautiful." Clara stood. "Just something that came to me." He stepped into the room. "Clara, I have a favor to ask." "Curious. What is it?" "I'd like to make your piece the opening performance for next year's summer class. I want students to hear it not just because of how it sounds, but because of what it means." Clara's eyes widened. "But it's not even finished. It's not written down." He smiled. "Then maybe it's time to write it." She laughed softly. "Maybe." He handed her a small folder. "This is yours," he said. "It's an official letter of appointment. You'll be part of next year's guest faculty. We want you to come back not as a student, not just as a performer, but as someone who reminds people why music matters." Clara held the folder, stunned. She had come to the conservatory to attend a simple music class. Now she was being asked to return as a mentor. She felt her eyes sting with tears. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Just say yes," he replied. She nodded. Slowly. "Yes." Later that afternoon, Daniel arrived to pick her up. He had driven all the way from their small town, excited and proud. He walked through the conservatory lobby with wide eyes, clearly feeling like he was in a palace of music. When he saw Clara, his face lit up. She ran to hug him, burying her face in his shoulder. "You did it," he said. "We did it." "What?" she replied, as they packed her things into the car. Daniel noticed the folder in her lap. "What's that?" Clara smiled. "A new beginning." As they drove away, Clara looked out the window, watching the conservatory fade behind her. She didn't feel sad, not really, because something had changed. She wasn't leaving something behind. She was carrying it with her. Back home, things felt both familiar and different. Her house still smelled like fresh bread. Her children ran to hug her, excited to have their mother back. The garden needed watering, the laundry needed folding. The ordinary things of life waited for her, like always, but inside her heart, nothing was ordinary anymore. She uncovered the old piano in the corner of her living room. The dust still rested on it, but it felt different now. It wasn't a silent reminder of what she lost. It was a partner again. She sat down and played a lullaby for her children that night. Her daughter fell asleep on the couch, listening to the soft notes. Her son, half asleep, whispered, "Mom, you should be on TV." She smiled and kissed his forehead. Music isn't always about being on TV. Sometimes it's just about playing with love. Word spread quickly in town about her conservatory performance. People came up to her in the grocery store, in the church, even at the bakery, asking about her music. "Will you give lessons?" Someone asked, "Can my daughter learn from you?" Another parent said. One day, the principal from the local school called her and invited her to give a special talk at the school's music day. Clara agreed. She stood in front of young students in the school auditorium, some with instruments in hand, some still discovering what they loved. She told them her story, not the one filled with awards, because she didn't have those. She told them the story of fear, of giving up, of returning after years of silence, and of playing not for fame, but for healing. "I used to think I failed," she said gently. "But now I understand I just needed time." The room was silent. She looked at the young faces and said, "No matter what anyone says, never believe you're too small, too simple, or too late. Music belongs to all of us." When she returned home that day, she sat down and finally began writing her own music. It wasn't for the conservatory. It wasn't for a performance. It was for her. Her hands moved across the page as her heart poured. Onto the lines, she wrote the melody she had played in the empty concert hall, the one she had whispered to herself in dreams, the one that held everything she had ever felt. Months later, that melody would be performed by students in the same conservatory where she had once been laughed at. They would play it not as a piece by some grand composer from history, but as a gift from someone who found her voice again, Clara Malik. Once a quiet wife in a quiet town had become something more, not because she changed who she was, but because she remembered who she had always been. And now, every time she touched the keys, the world listened.